everybody, welcome to Rock and Roll Shin-Soo Choo. This is episode number 92. My name is Gabe Estel, and I'm here with my co-hosts Dennis Levi Leach and Jonathan Getz. How's it going, guys?
Great.
We're recording this on Memorial Day, so happy Memorial Day to everyone. Yes. Hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for all of those who served. Tonight we are going to be serving up you, though, the latest batch, the 2018 version of the Choo-Ins. If you haven't heard a Choo-In episode before, I'll give you a little bit of the rundown here. All three of us, if I could speak for all three of us guys, probably have some ambivalence on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I would say. We certainly, a lot of artists we value and that are important to popular music are certainly in there, but a lot of artists that we love a lot aren't. And it's likely, with this sort of kind of gatekeeper mentality that the people behind the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame have, it's likely that a lot of great musicians will never get in to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So about 3 years ago, we decided to start our own Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and we call these the Choo-Ins, okay? We've had, each of us nominates or I should say inducts an artist every year. We've had some good ones so far. You can check previous episodes for those. We'll post the links to the previous episodes as well. We've inducted everybody from Kevin Kinney to the Marshall Tucker Band to DJ Quick, Faith No More, Mudhoney. You can go down the list here. There's been 9 inductees so far, and tonight I'm very excited to say that we have 3 new inductees, all great picks, and all really excited to just welcome them to the hall, to our hall. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on those. I'll go with mine first, guys. We'll just start alphabetically here. My inductee tonight is a band that it's not one of those bands you get into like when you're a teenager, like an American teenager probably, or even you might not necessarily be exposed to even I didn't even hear him really in my college years. I'd heard the name, but it starts for me with a guy that he's not in the band, but I say that it was kind of my indirect introduction to this band, and that's Nick Drake. Now, pause for a second. Nick Drake is not my nominee, all right? But, I first heard Nick Drake about, I don't know, probably around 1999, 2000, so, almost 20 years ago.
Did you hear him before or after the Volkswagen commercial?
I guess I'd never seen the Volkswagen commercial. I heard about him because one of our favorite bands, the Black Crowes, always, Rich Robinson, their guitarist, cited him as an influence. And I had heard the Crowes back in '97. They did Black Eyed Dog instrumental, which if you get a chance to stream that, it's from, I sound really geeky here, it's from Deer Creek '97. And it's fucking phenomenal. It's haunting, is what it is. It's just Rich on an electric guitar with Black Eyed Dog. So that was kind of like my introduction to Nick Drake, and I picked up Fade to Blue, or it was like a greatest hits kind of
Way to Blue.
Yeah. Way to Blue, and then I bought everything after that, and I know you guys love him as well, and he's just a master of the open G. And as I started to learn more about Nick Drake. Some people's names kept popping up, people that he was kind of associated with, or, musicians that he looked up to, they looked up to him, vice versa, some people that he played with. And a band that kept coming up was Fairport Convention. And Fairport Convention is my inductee, so I'm proud to induct them tonight. And another guy that kept coming up who was in Fairport Convention was a while by the guy named Richard Thompson. Who is still going strong and really putting out good music still as well. You can probably recognize him for his famous beret that he always wears. But for Fairport Convention, for me, their music was kind of like medieval blues is how I would best describe it. They get, the label that they get most often is probably folk rock. And that's true to a certain degree, I think. But the Fairport Convention to me is kind of like if the Byrds took more of an influence from Chaucer rather than Bob Dylan. If they took more of their if they took more of their influence from like the Canterbury Tales as opposed to the Free Will and Bob Dylan. And there's a bluesy element too. So along with a band called Pentacle, and Alexis Kostner, another guy, they kind of merged. Fairport Convention kind of merged this folk baroque, which involved a lot of finger picking, with sort of American blues and American folk in the late 60s. And they really created this whole kind of movement of British folk rock, which took shape, in the late 60s in England. And it was certainly more akin to, the countryside than the city,
and I
so
think
to speak.
In the United States, I think that type of music was kind of a regional thing. I know
right.
Growing up in Illinois, I was not exposed to a lot of Fairport Convention or Pentacle.
Sure, yeah.
Moving to Colorado and going to lots of thrift stores and garage sales, they were very popular out here.
Yeah, okay.
That style of music, that the easy folk rock type stuff seems to have gone over really well here, because I come across the records quite often.
Yeah, a little more of a pastoral feel in Colorado too, so that the landscape atmosphere probably has something to do with it. But that movement of folk rock, that really gave us, it kind of spawned people like Nick Drake, John Martin, Bert Jansch, who's phenomenal, who was in Pentacle as well. And it even laid the groundwork for later. I mentioned the Canterbury Tales from Chaucer, the Canterbury scene, which was kind of a little more closely linked to Prague, but it's kind of an offshoot of that too. And when I say the Canterbury scenes, I'm talking about bands like Soft Machine and Gong and Caravan, which are all great bands too. So I recommend everybody check them out in addition to Fairport Convention.
I think you could lend the term acoustic Prague to because they encompass the medieval aspects of the Prague music, and they pair it with like the acoustic folk medieval instruments and stuff.
Yeah, right. It's like if you walked into a pub in England and in medieval times and like Joni Mitchell was sitting there singing. It's like that. But excuse me. With Fairpoint, I think that might have been the first belch on air. Sorry about that, guys.
No, I beat you to it.
But anyway, okay.
Just tonight.
But Fairport Convention, at least to most kind of sound like your typical FM kind of radio classic rock fan, they don't have the name recognition as a lot of other popular groups of the 70s, but their influence, I think, was very strongly felt on some of the most recognizable work by Led Zeppelin, Jethro Tull, Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. All of those bands incorporated a lot of the elements that bands like Pentacle and Fairport Convention were doing, particularly Zeppelin. If you listen to a song like Battle of Evermore, or Bron-Y-Aur Stomp, if you listen to those tunes, that's got Fairport Convention, I think, and that whole scene that came a little before some of those bands that I just mentioned, that's got that whole scene written all over it. And with Levi said medieval, and that's kind of one of the first terms that comes to mind for me, because a lot of bands of the 60s, British bands, went really bluesy, it's kind of the American influence, or they went, kind of very psychedelic. Whereas, Fairport Convention's like, hey, let's go back a few centuries, right? Let's find some influences there. And their first record, which is self-titled, kind of had those more American influences, like, the Byrds, Buffalo Springfield, Joni Mitchell. But then on their second record, which is actually my favorite, called What We Did on Our Holiday, came out in 1968, 68 or 69, I believe. That's when Sandy Denny arrived. And they had another female vocalist on their first record named Judy Dybel, I believe is her name. But Sandy Denny came along and really, I think, along with Richard Thompson, really created like the Fairport, what we kind of define as like the Fairport sound. And if I won't I won't go into details tonight, but Sandy Denny, pretty tragic life. If you ever get a chance to look anything up about her, it unfortunately wasn't a pretty picture. She died in 1978 after several kind of rough years. But their fourth LP, which is the one that kind of one of those albums that makes like top 500 lists, and it's considered their opus, is Legion Leaf. From 69, and that was actually born out of a tragedy. I don't know if you guys know this. Like Legion Leaf, they had recorded some of it, and there was a really bad car accident. Everybody but Sandy Denny was in this van, and their driver, like who was like their roadie as well, was drunk. And it was like late after a gig, and like I think everybody was pretty much asleep but him, and he got in a wreck, and their drummer got killed. Martin Lamble, I believe, was his name, and then also Richard Thompson's girlfriend at the time was killed as well. And this was right around the time I think they were recording or they were about to record Legion Leaf. And so kind of out of that tragedy, they got a new drummer, and their masterwork is sort of born out of that, because it was they went to this house out in the country and recorded it, and it really kind of brought their influences together, with the Sandy Denny bringing very traditional influences, whereas all the other guys in the group were kind of more bent on kind of the American sound. But Sandy Denny was like, I'm going to sing these songs that are 500 years old, and they're like, what? And she did it, and like they were all kind of blown away. So yeah, I think Sandy Denny, I'm kind of inducting her as well, just because I think she's such a pivotal figure for them. For the other work, they're still together as well, and even though he's not in the band, Richard Thompson will come every once in a while and do reunion shows with him. So it seems like a really cool kind of collective of people. If a couple other, before I pass the baton, a couple other, I mentioned Legion Leaf. What We Did on Our Holiday is great. Unhalf Bricking and Full House. So there's like about a 4 album stretch there that are just really great works. And Sandy Denny isn't on Full House, and it's Richard Thompson's last album with them. So it's a bit of a transitional work, but it's still really great as well. And then they kept recording. They in the mid 70s, Sandy Denny left for an album or two. Richard Thompson left. A couple of the other guys left, and they formed a band that's called Steel Eye Span, which are good too. So their mid 70s stuff kind of reminds me more of like kind of Poco and the Eagles. It kind of is a little more of that kind of California kind of, I don't know, folky country kind of sound. But those 4 records that I just mentioned, starting from What We Did in Our Holiday to Full House, are great works, and just a great output in a very short amount of time for a band. I mean, all what I just described came out. All 4 of those records came out in 2 years, from basically I think actually less than 2 years.
So they did it back then.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think they put out 3 albums in 1969. I mean, it was just insane, how prolific they were. And like I said, they still tour. Last thing I'll mention is, I think Jonathan and I once had a conversation about kind of knowing how cool people are when you hear what bands they're into. So if somebody says the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, Pink Floyd, or Zeppelin, you're like, okay, I guess that's a start, right? And then when that person says, they're into the Kinks, they're into the Faces, they're into Humble Pie, or they're into Free, you're like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. So if they say they're into Fairport Convention, Pentangle, or John Martin, you need to get that person's phone number. All right. So that's kind of what I'll leave it on. They're in that, the people in the know, not to say Fairport Convention didn't achieve some popularity, but there's something that if you've never heard them or you never got into them, it'll be a real joy when you do. And for me, it was a little bit later in life. But so that's my inductee, Fairport Convention.
Yeah, excellent choice, Gabe. And,
Thank you.
You mentioned John Martin,
mm-hmm.
and John Martin was, for the people out there that don't know, was a great acoustic guitar player, singer, songwriter, and friend of Nick Drake. And he was also one of the main influences of the artist I'm going to be inducting tonight.
Good segue. Yeah, all right.
And that artist is a man by the name of Michael Hedges. And Michael Hedges was born in Sacramento and raised in Oklahoma. He went to college and studied classical guitar composition, and basically kind of like played around gigs while he was in college to kind of pay his way. And what he would probably be most known for is kind of, I'm not going to say he was the inventor, but he was one of the first people to ever be on mass-produced records doing like percussive slap harmonics on acoustic guitars, doing right-handed hammer-ons, pretty much almost always exclusively used alternate tunings. Some of them really strange, some of them, you can find in tuning books. And he got noticed playing one of these gigs right out of college by William Ackerman, who is the owner and founder of the Windham Hill record label, which is kind of known for being a new age music label, especially at that time. They had like George Winston was their big draw at that time, and it's very, new age ambient piano music. And so they signed him, and his first two records are all instrumental. The first one from 1981 is called Breakfast in the Field. And the second one from 1984 is called Aerial Boundaries. Both are excellent records. They were pretty much considered like monumental and groundbreaking at the time they came out, just for some of the stuff that I mentioned, the techniques and things he was doing, which a lot of, some people on the surface would look at stuff like that as kind of like parlor tricks, or like, I think sometimes people look at guitarists who do that kind of a thing as like they're trying to cover up that they're not as good as maybe at composing, or like they're trying to make up for some area of their, and it wasn't that for him at all. He could compose anything, and it was, I think one of the lines he used in an interview one time was that he was not a guitarist who composes, he was a composer who happened to play the guitar. And so he felt he had to use all of that to create the sounds he was hearing in his head. And one of the things kind of about him, I'm not sure if it's OCD or what, but he insisted upon like the precise duration of sounds and silences when he would perform his pieces. Like, and I think that lends to the classical musician, you know what I mean?
Right.
Most classical musicians are very picky like that, and I'm not going to say he ever resented the fact, but I'm not sure he completely liked being associated as maybe being new age. I don't think he really agreed with that label. When asked in interviews what kind of music he played, he gave a lot of different answers. Here's a few. One reporter who told he played heavy mental.
That's well put.
He told another he played new edge. Acoustic thrash was one he called it. And then my favorite was he told a reporter one time that asked what kind of music he played. He said, "I play deep tissue gladiator guitar."
He strings together words nicely too. Those are all pretty apt descriptions. And
so, 1984, he got the opportunity to open up for the Jerry Garcia Band on a tour. And so, after that tour, he kind of insisted with Will Ackerman that he wanted his next record to be able to show some of his lyrics, and he wanted to be able to sing on it. And so his first records, I think, had sold well enough to where they decided, that was okay. They would let him do that. And so in 1985, his third album called Watching My Life Go By, which was my first introduction to him, His first album with lyrics and singing, it came out. And once he started releasing songs with lyrics, you got to also kind of see the playful side of him, because he was excellent at choosing covers. I have the Watching My Life Go By right here on CD, and he does All Along the Watchtower on this. And he has a live CD. It's called Live on the Devil Planet. And he does Prince's and Sheila E.'s Love Bazaar. He does like a really cool version of it.
Mm-hmm.
He was a really, really, I don't know the word to, just a very unique performer. There's not tons of footage of him on YouTube or anything.
Right.
You can find some of it, but you can see that like he could command a crowd just by the way. Because I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of almost naked to be up there, just you and your acoustic guitar. You don't have a whole band behind you to fall back on. You know, any mistake you make is out in the open, because it's just you and that guitar. And some other big influence of his, besides John Martin, were the Beatles, obviously. And like as far as classical, he was into Stravinsky and is it Varese? And one of the other things he was known for was he did a short tour with Leo Kottke.
Oh, okay.
They would play each.
Seems like a good pairing. Yeah.
Yeah, they would each do a solo set, and then they would come together at the end and play together. And I guess some of those performances, for the people that were live there, they said that it was just like amazing, mind-blowing and stuff. And it was at a time when, there wasn't a lot of video recording and things like that.
Sure.
So there's a couple videos you can find of that. Unfortunately, in 1997, he was coming home from visiting, I think, a girlfriend on the East Coast, and he lived in Mendocino County, and he was driving on the highway, and the road was slick, and he slid off an embankment and went down into a ravine and got ejected from the vehicle and passed away. I don't think he was found for a few days after, and it was a shock to the acoustic guitar world. He had won lots of guitar world polls and things of that nature, and so it was a pretty. In 1997, did it make my radar? No. But his loss was felt in the community for sure. And
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just was going to wrap it up with saying that I think it really would have been interesting to see where he was going to take it all, because it seemed like, it was all culminating to something else too. You know what I mean? A lot of his music and compositions, they evolved, and so it would have been neat to see where it all evolved to.
And I assume, died in 97. Two people that became names after that I heard, at least in his sound, were, and so I'd wonder if he would have become a fixture in the jam band scene or an influence, because Tim Reynolds and Keller Williams, to me, you know what I mean?
Keller Williams wrote a song about him.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's oh yeah, that's those two seem like he had a big influence on them. I mean, I don't know about Tim Reynolds, if Tim Reynolds ever cited him as an influence, but to me it sounds like it's there. If he would have stuck around,
Keller Williams,
I wonder if he would have become a part of that scene.
Right? Yeah. Well, it would have been interesting, because that would have been the time when a lot of the new age labels were dying out. So if he would have wanted to maybe continue evolving his touring career, that might have been the group he could have latched onto.
Sure.
The song that Keller Williams wrote, if you want to hear the tribute to him, is called "Not of This Earth."
Mm. Okay. Cool. Good deal, man. And I had to admit, I had to look up the guy when Levi told me. I'm like, oh shit, I'm kind of embarrassed. I've never heard of that guy. And I went to his, just like his Wikipedia page, all the accolades, Townsend was talking about him, said he was awesome, Bonnie Raitt, all these great players. We're just saying how awesome he was. And I listened to that. I got to listen to his first record, and it's great, man. Really, really, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome stuff. Both your inductees gave me an excuse to listen to a lot of music I'd never listened to before, so I'm appreciative of that.
Also, I think like Levi's guy could have fit in like Fairport Convention too. You know what I mean? Like adding him, like that would have been whoa.
Yeah.
Like yeah. So hey, Fairport Convention still tours, and maybe they could work in some Michael Hedges numbers. I don't know. But anyway.
Well, here's a segue for you. My inductee would probably not fit into Fairport Convention very well.
I'd like to see him try, though.
I'm sure he could handle his own, but he would have to morph a little bit. So yeah, my inductee, just to give you a bit of a teaser, is somebody who I came in to my musical life when I was about 15, and honestly, when he did, I thought it was going to be just like for a blip on the radar, and that was going to be it. Because it was for a very specific reason and actually just a specific song. And I'll come back to that, though. But my inductee is bass player extraordinaire Mike Watt. Mike Watt is a founding member of the Minutemen and Firehose, along with his own solo projects and several other projects with various people. You know, it's kind of a rotating cast of some of the same people and then with other people mixed in. So but Watt is kind of most revered for his work with the 1980s punk band The Minutemen, who I mentioned. They got their start in Southern California and survived, kind of a sometimes reluctant punk scene, possibly because of they had a lot of jazz prog influences. Mm-hmm. So
it was like they were.
They didn't sound like Black Flag.
No, right? It was like they weren't punk enough to be labeled like punk and have all the punk kids there.
Yeah, right.
But they were like too punky to play at like rock shows and stuff.
Right, absolutely. And so there was a bit of backlash there at some of the shows. You can watch there's a documentary on the Minutemen on YouTube. It's called We Jam Econo. And there's the crowds that spit on them, which I don't know, in some punk shows can be a blessing, but
right.
But this was not the case here. So yeah, it was rough going at some gigs, but mostly they were gaining an audience, and they were ultimately signed by SST Records, who after Black Flag, their second roster member was the Minutemen. So in early Minutemen songs were like rarely longer than 90 seconds. And their 15-song debut LP clocks in at a very 21st century attention span accommodating 17 minutes. The Minutemen released 4 studio albums and several EPs until lead singer D. Boone died in a car wreck in 1985. And while I appreciate the Minutemen and hugely important records like Double Nickels on the Dime, admittedly, I'm kind of more partial to Watt's post-Minutemen career, which continued with a band called Firehose, not Firehouse. And
what's so funny, you can find Firehose videos on the Firehouse band's Vivo on YouTube.
No way.
Yes. Yeah. I noticed that.
That's hilarious.
And doing some listening for the show.
Wow. So Firehose included Minutemen drummer George Hurley and a singer named Ed Crawford, who came over from Ohio and joined the group, had some songs. He
basically, like, a little story about him, he like begged to be in the band.
Yeah.
He like basically contacted Mike Watt and like basically kept pestering.
He looked up Watt in the phone book.
And then like flew there, then looked him up, and then was like, "Hey, I'm gonna be."
Was he just like a big Minutemen fan? I guess
he was. Yeah. And supposedly the story goes that Camper Van Beethoven lied to him, and they were like yanking his chain and said that Watt wanted to form another band, and I don't know why they would do that. Like Watt is grieving and like was considering not forming another band and retiring from music, and Ed's like, okay, well that's my in. I'm gonna go do it. But it worked out.
He's an excellent drummer too, and like the annals of punk drummer history, dude. That guy's got chops. That guy can play.
He's a beast. Absolutely. And whether it be the Minutemen work, which, it really evolved over time. Early on, like I said, it was those, 30-second songs, 50-second songs. But there was some funky stuff going on in the songs. By the end of the repertoire, their last album, it was getting a lot more elaborate. And with a bit of a prog influence too. They were big fans of Blue Oyster Cult. Go figure. And so that started to show on their last album. I'll come back to that though. But the Fire Hose stuff was definitely more alternative and poppy than the Minutemen stuff. But Watt's songwriting and his bass stylings were undeniably the connection between the two projects. You could tell that there was a relation without even knowing the names of the band members. But Firehose went on to release 5 LPs. They played nearly 1,000 gigs before they disbanded in '94. And it was around this time that I was finally introduced to Mike Watt. And in '94, '95, I was just like a Pearl Jam obsessed nerd. And anything that remotely connected to Pearl Jam that was coming out, I was on top of. And I was told about this track called Against the 70s that was going to come out, and Eddie Vedder was going to sing on it, but it was with this cast of characters who I didn't know who they were. It was going to be on Mike Watt's first solo record, and that's all I knew. And I remember hearing it for one of the first times in Subway in Petersburg. For some reason, you can remember where you were, and to hear it, and I was hooked, man. It's a hell of a song. First of all, it's undeniably, a hell of a song. It's, there's no like bending over backwards to appreciate it, just because, there was a relation there to Pearl Jam, and I wanted to like it. Like it was, it ripped. Do you guys remember when it came out?
No.
Yeah, I bought it. I mean, I was drawn to it, I think, in the same manner you were, So I bought Ball Hog or Tugboat in '95, and I didn't really know, because I had heard Against the 70s too, and I thought, oh my God, I heard it on the radio. I remember like WQLZ played it, just because there was a connection to Eddie Vedder, essentially, you know. And I was like, whoa, man, that song kicks ass. I got to go get that. And then I open up the CD. And sorry, Levi, I opened up the CD, and like the amount of people on it is insane. Like the Beastie Boys are on it, and like I think Billy Corrigan's on it, and like I don't know if he's
Dave
on it.
Grohl, Flea,
James Eha's on it.
Evan Dando,
Jay Mascis,
Bernie Worrell, Henry
yeah,
Rollins.
Like I was like
Dave
Perner.
Pick it up. Wow, yeah.
Yeah, dude.
The Meat Puppets,
Dave Perner, dude, get it.
Jay Mascis,
my first introduction to the world of Mike Watt, or to the world of Firehose, would have been in 2001. I got a CD by a band called Widespread Panic called Don't Tell the Band. And there's a song on there called Sometimes, which is a Firehose song.
Yeah. It's a phenomenal song, too. Yeah, I mean, it's a totally hooky song. It could be a single. Widespread.
I always thought it was, at first, I thought it was a Panic song.
Sure.
Until later, when I saw the credits for the lyrics and stuff, and I was like, huh?
Admitted, that was the first time I had heard Sometimes as well. Absolutely. I'll come back to that. Back to Ball Hog or Tugboat. You're right, Gabe. I mean, I thought it was going to be a one-hit wonder sort of album, and I would only listen to Against the 70s, but Big Train, Chinese Fire Drill, Maggot Brain. There's a version of Funkadelic's Maggot Brain on here, 12 minutes long. Like I said, it's got Bernie Worrell on keys, and the guitar player is none other than who's the guy from Wilco? Sorry,
Nels Cline, right?
Nels Cline, thank you. Yes, slipping my mind there. And it absolutely rips. And so as a result, like this stayed in my 6-disc CD changer cartridge for many months, and then came a couple years later, in '98, came Contemplate in the Engine Room, which was kind of a self-described punk rock opera about the Minutemen and Mike Watt's dad's time in the Navy and even his hometown of Pedro. And shortly thereafter, he went on a tour with Mudhoney in '98, and they played the Metro, and I got tickets to go see Mudhoney and Mike Watt at the Metro. Touring with Mike Watt was Nels Cline and Stephen Hodges for this. Basically, they were going to play "Contemplate" in the Engine Room in its entirety.
Stephen who's Stephen Hodges?
He was he's a drummer who is actually very very accomplished. He's been with Mark Ford, actually.
Sweet.
He's been with John Hammond, who's one of my favorite blues artists. He's been with Mavis Staples. He's got quite the resume.
Cool.
Yeah.
He played with T-Bone Burnett.
Nice. All right. Sorry. Yeah, I feel bad I didn't know. I was like, So anyway.
Yeah. And so they took that show out on the road, and although I did see conflicting reports as to whether or not Hodges was on the tour, I'm pretty sure he was, but I did see conflicting reports. I'm trying to get it confirmed. Anyway, but so I went to this show.
Probably call him and ask him.
Good, I could.
Right.
And Watt was the opener at the Metro, but admittedly I was kind of there. I was kind of more interested in Mudhoney at the time. I was just more familiar with Mudhoney's work. I wasn't familiar with all of Watt's repertoire and his prior projects, and the tickets were like $10. It was ridiculous. But to see what Watt did out there performing, contemplating the Engine Room in its entirety, like cemented his legacy in my mind. It was just this energy and intensity kind of paired with this playfulness, and it was amazing. It almost stole the show, and I think a lot of people there would say that they put on, that they could have headlined, with all due respect to Mudhoney, and I was totally psyched to see Mudhoney as well.
Sure.
But his set was absolutely phenomenal, and he won me as like a fan for life as a result. A quick note: others might were most likely introduced to the Minutemen through MTV's Jackass, which used their track Corona as its theme song. So if you can think of the Jackass theme song that they would use for the bumper music as well, that's the Minutemen.
When I heard Fire Hose Gets, because I have to admit I'm not that familiar with Fire Hose. If I'd heard it, I didn't remember it, and I listened to the first LP, and did they have a relationship with Husker Du? Because it sounds like they would be kindred spirits, is my guess.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah,
that's what I thought of when I first heard it. I was like, oh, this seems like this kind of, it sort of sounds like Husker Du a little bit.
Yeah,
maybe even some early replacements, a little bit too. So,
absolutely.
Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Good point.
Yeah.
But some other notes I have here. Watt is a man of themes, and to understand his themes is to really understand what he's all about. And whether it's the presence of his just the very presence of his bass guitar. He calls it the thud staff, and it's kind of like another character. It's almost like its own character. His hometown of San Pedro, California, he calls it Pedro, and you need to know that because he references it in a lot of songs. If you go to his website, which he's managed himself since 1996, and he proudly puts that at the bottom, the very first link on the website is to the San Pedro Chamber of Commerce. He playfully name checks himself in his own songs, almost as referring to a comic strip version of himself. And most poignantly, he's always referencing his late bandmate and friend D. Boone in song on his website, or annually on his birthday. He's always given D. Boone shout-outs. All the albums are dedicated to D. Boone. Like I said, he's totally down to earth, maintains his own website, sends his own email newsletters, which you can actually reply to, and he might just reply back. I think I've told the story before. One time I emailed Mike Watt about what I should do out in LA, and he graciously replied back a few weeks later with a rundown of the record stores and the hot dog joints I should hit up. He's always playing small joints around greater LA. Apropos here, he had one of the very first podcasts, the Watt from Pedro show, debuted on the internet in 2001. And it was officially a podcast in 2006, which is a long time ago. in the podcast
He's
history.
a renaissance man.
No doubt. Yeah, he's all for it. And other projects. He has a project called Dose with ex-Black Flag bassist and also his ex-wife Kira Rossler. They formed the band. They're both bass players. That's why it's called Dose. And they got married and divorced, but they still release albums together. Also with Jay Mascis and the Fog. Also with the Stooges. Went to Lollapalooza up there in Chicago and saw him play bass. He took over for Ron Ashton. This is before Ron Ashton died. Ron Ashton relinquished the bass duties to Watt, and he recorded a couple studio albums with the Stooges when they kind of had their rejuvenation. So yeah, and several other projects. Always a rotating cast.
He played on Government Mules, The Deep End. He played on Effigy.
He did. Yep. Yes.
With Jerry Cantrell. Yeah.
Yeah. And, he's a big, Minutemen were big CCR fans. On the last Minutemen record, they did, Have You Ever Seen the Rain? They cover that. So there's a bit of a connection there. Selected discography. Minutemen, Double Nickels on the Dime, Three-Way Tie for Last, for my two favorites. Firehose, album's called Iffin, and Flying the Flannel. On one of those, you'll find Widespread Panic's, Levi mentioned Widespread Panic covered sometimes. And since then, Ball Hugger Tugboat is that album that introduced him to us and Contemplated in the Engine Room. Mike Watt.
Cool. Excellent work. Good job, guys. Pat's high fives, A pluses. Really, really happy to induct another class of Choo-Ins. Want to remind everybody, you can hear the previous inductions from 2015, 16, and 17 at rockchew.com. You can get every episode of the podcast there.
Oh, a quick addition. Sorry, I meant to mention it. We'll all be putting together YouTube playlists of our inductees.
Yes, absolutely.
And we'll embed those on the episode page. Cool. So you can check those out if you aren't familiar with these artists. Sorry,
absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. Hope everybody enjoys those. We'll be posting those as well, and you can check out all kinds of cool stuff at rockchew.com. Want to remind everybody that you can listen to us many different ways, as I mentioned, on rockchew.com, on iTunes, your favorite podcasting app. We're on all of those. As well as you can watch us on YouTube. You can subscribe to us there as well. And also you can follow us on the Twitter and the Instagram at RockInChew. That's in as in this is not your ordinary podcast. It's Rock and Roll Shin-Soo Chew. So until next time, we'll see you in episode 93. And hope everybody has a great start to the summer. Thank you so much. Congratulations to the 2008 Choo-Ins.
Peace.